Hello, and welcome to another Rouge unit of the Reek. And today we're taking a look at the KV-1E. One of the first Russian heavy tanks was the T-35, the 10-man multi-turreted mechanical monstrosity, which ended up being completely and utterly useless. It was designed for World War I breakthrough tactics in mind, but the modern battlefield was quite a bit different. And so the Soviets realized this in the mid to late 30s, and hey, we should probably develop another medium tank design. And they'd end up experimenting with a few tank designs. The one they end up going with is the one we're talking about today, the KV-1, or the Kilment-Voroshilov tank. It was named after a Soviet defense commissar. There's also two other Soviet heavy tanks they were experimenting with at this time, the SMK and the T-100, which were both multi-turreted, but those didn't really go anywhere because multi-turret tanks are a little bit silly. The KV-1 would end up being quite an iconic tank due to its rather thick frontal armor. It could bounce off the majority of anti-tank weaponry of the time in the early 40s. In the Winter War and in the opening stages of Operation Barbarossa, it ended up being quite a tough nut to crack. The Germans, for example, really needing to rely on 88mm guns to knock it out at long range. However, even though the tank was pretty damn good for the time, the crews not so much, and with the rather limited production before the Great Patriotic War began, there wasn't a whole lot of them, and the Germans could end up outmaneuvering these lumbering tanks. Of course, there'd end up being a whole heap of different variations of the KV tank, which we're not going to go into detail because we all know what the KV-2 is by now. But in regards to the KV-1, the model in game, the 1E, it's based off the 1940 year design, but with the E, or applique armor, being bolted onto the side of the turret. Even though early on in the war, the KV-1 had quite a feared reputation, by 1943 it was starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. The Germans were developing better anti-tank weaponry to deal with said tank, and so it ended up slowly being phased out in favour of the IS-1 and the T-34-85 tanks. And by 1944 it was really a rear echelon tank. In game, the KV-1E is a 65-point heavy tank available exclusively to the 26th Guards Infantry Division, and it has two weapons. And the main weapon being the ZIS-5 76.2mm cannon, with 30 AP shells and a rather hefty amount of high explosive at 84 shells. You have 100mm of penetration, 8 damage on penetration, 42% accuracy, 1.5km range, and 6 rounds a minute. It's a pretty standard mid-tier anti-tank, anti-infantry cannon. You have a whole lot of ammunition, so you don't have to worry about running out of ammo, but it has enough AP to deal with the majority of medium targets at medium range, and as well as infantry, anti-tank guns, support guns, etc. You also have 2 machine guns, which is nice. I mean, it's better than having a single machine gun. Up down to miscellaneous stats, you have 110mm of frontal armor, strong top armor, 85mm at side, and 65mm at the back. You go 28km off-road, 35km on the road, you have bad stealth, and very low optics. In battle, the KV-1E is a heavy tank for a medium tank price. It's a budget, kind of out-of-date heavy tank, which isn't surprising considering its historical application. In terms of being a budget heavy tank, it's really bloody good. 65 points, 110mm of frontal armor, that is bloody good value. Heck, even his side armor is rather thick at 85mm. The majority of mid-range cannons are gonna have a hard time penetrating you. Of course, the heavy armor for Soviet stuff is not as great per se, because most of the time you fight against Germans or German type equipment, and they have a lot of Pak-40s and high velocity 75mm cannons, which can go through you. You're at longer ranges, it's going to be tougher for them. Of course, the main downsides of the KV-1 is really its speed is quite a bit slow, not that much slower compared to a T-34, for example, but you're not going to be using this for flanking maneuvers. But that's not its job. The KV-1E is just a cheap, medium-price heavy tank, which we're just going to slap on the front line to provide cheap fire support, mainly against infantry and light armor targets. Its availability is rather generous. You get 6 of these in A phase, and 12 of them in B phase. However, your tank tab is quite limited for 26 Guards infantry with only 4 slots. Out of the other available tanks, the KV-1E is definitely a no-brainer, just due to its rather cheap price and rather good availability. It's not a bad idea, due to the fact this is a division which has poor availability in general, to take the B phase card, because then you can really spam them out. Yes, having some in A phase is quite useful, especially if it's thick armor, but you want to try and make your availability last as long as possible, unless you're trying to win as like a maverick income. We have a tangent here, but the Finnish Panzer Division has 2 KV-1s available to it, the Klimi. It's somewhat historically accurate, as the Finns in real life managed to capture exactly 2 KV-1s from the Soviets during the Continuation War. However, in game, they're represented as the KV-1S, which is not accurate at all, because in real life, they managed to capture 1 KV-1E model of 1940 and 1 KV-1 model of 1942. This is completely and utterly irredeemable, Eugene. I can't believe you would do this. But anyway, overall, the KV-1E is a fantastic tank, especially for division that it's available to. It's cheap, heavy fire support, and in a meta which really focuses more on medium and cheaper end tanks, the KV-1E fits in quite perfectly and has a little bit of extra armor to boot. And well, I'm going to leave it off at that. This has been another Rang Rouge Unit of the Week. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and usual, please just take it easy.